What is needed is for people who have aligned with spirit and are feeling the heartbeat of our earth and all of that, to walk out into life, and not just the bits that they like, but all of it, and engage. We urgently need, as it were, these people who will be willing to walk out of their village, as it were, across the battle lines into these diverse places, and not simply with the view that they have something that the others need, but with curiosity and questions. We are dealt a hand of cards, and then we pick them up and we turn them over and we look at them, and they are not probably what we hoped. And we're tempted to then peer across to the other person and their deck of cards. What am I meant to do with this? We say to creation. Creation remains silent. Creation knows fully well. It's nothing much to do with what those cards are. It's how you're now going to choose to play them.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you to all of you that are part of this, through listening, sharing, and of course our wonderful patrons. The online community that I've been talking about is now live. It's called Presence Collective, and we're weaving our way through monthly themes that support us with living creative, connected, and courageous lives. Some of the founding members have already gathered, and if this resonates with you, I would love for you to join us. It's a space for community and support that fits in around your daily life responsibilities and keeps you inspired and growing and grounded. This month, it's all about meditation. And you can also just do the meditation course if you don't want to be part of the whole membership. I've really made this with a clear intention to provide something that is very useful and empowering, which focuses on you developing a stronger relationship with your intuition. No gimmicks, no manipulation, just great practices and tools and a held space to share in. For those of you that wish to experience Embercombe, they have many great courses on throughout the summer. I'm hosting the only live course I'm doing this year there in September. It's called Wild Grace, and it takes us on the heroine's journey so we can understand more about the different aspects of ourselves through a relationship to the goddesses Lakshmi, Kali, Durga, Saraswati, and Green Tara. We will embody the archetypes they represent and awaken them through yoga, mantra, creative workshops, and ritual, as well as connecting deeply to nature. I hope that some of you feel called to join us. My guest today is the founder of Embercombe, Mac Macartney, who is an international speaker, writer, and changemaker. Mentored by Indigenous people over many years, he has acquired profound and original insights into questions preoccupying many contemporary leaders. Mac seeks to inspire the emergence of the leader in each of us, the leader who will take courageous action for a better world. Championing a new story of sustainability lies at the heart of this. Mac is the author of Finding Earth, Finding Soul, as well as his most recent book, The Children's Fire. He writes about his search for meaning and purpose in a culture that is captivated by values and beliefs that assault the Earth's life systems and collapse society in upon itself. Mac's purpose is to touch hearts, fire imagination, and invite courageous action to better serve our world. All his work is aligned to this mission. This is one of our longer episodes. I know they've been creeping up in length, and I decided not to edit this down as Mac has so much to offer. His wisdom as an elder and his youthful openness to the present moment. I feel that this conversation can inspire the leader in all of us and empower the human in all of us to find our purpose and to remember our kindness, our complexity, and our vulnerability. I hope that you enjoy this interview. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Mac, it's an absolute pleasure to be here in your cabin at Embercombe on this beautiful land, and to be here talking to you and with you. I wonder, just as I've spent some days walking around this land, if you can share with us what it was about this valley that made you want to bring people here.
Yeah, so when was it? In 97, I suppose. I had been told I'd been given the money. And so the money was there. And it felt like a lot of money. And yet I couldn't find the place, you know. There were certain practical considerations in my mind about not making it too difficult for people to get there, that there should be some kind of connection, city connections and rail and road and all the rest. I was in Poland, and somebody sent me a picture of this place that had come up for sale. In fact, it wasn't actually up for sale. It was like a pre-notice of a place that was going to come up for sale. I suppose an estate agent's effort to try and stimulate interest. And I just looked at this photograph of this valley with wooded down one side, pasture down the other side, 14th century thatch cottage with an extension built in the 70s. In the foothills of Dartmoor, 15-20 minutes from Exeter, all around, almost nestled inside a sort of forested area. And something a lake as well, you know. And I just sort of started feeling really excited, but the price was twice as much as I'd got. But nonetheless, when I got back from Poland, I immediately said, well, could I come and visit? And when I met the people, it was so clear that they thoroughly disliked each other. They were a married couple, and it was really rather horrible just being in their presence, because the venom really between them was one aspect. And the other was they clearly had absolutely zero interest in the land itself and almost never ventured into it. So this 50 acres was almost, for the duration of the period that they'd owned it, there were a couple of ponies, but I think the footfall in the land was tiny. So I asked if I could go out and walk around the land, and I'd be very happy to do this on my own, which I really wanted to do. And they were relieved. And so I went out, and it was like walking through this amazing little, I say little, but 50 acres in one level is little, but walking through this land, seeing everywhere badger trails, fox trails. There was a herd of deer, fallow deer on the land that I could see. The whole place was buzzing and thrumming with life and vitality. And I realized there was a hill, which we now call Cedar Hill, which is part of Embercombe, that next to the lake, that if I climbed up it and then looked northeast, I would see the whole of the valley. So I did that, and still to this day there's the remains of a bench there that I placed later. And that bench is exactly where I stood on that first time I ever visited Embercombe and looked at this valley. And I was just in some kind of state of profound excitement, but in a fairly suppressed kind of way, because it was also twice as much money as I had, you know. So I couldn't get too excited, but looking at it saying, I think this might be the place, but it can't be the place. I think it is. And what made me really think that was that it was so similar to the valley that I had seen in a vision that I'd had in my early 20s, when I saw this valley, which on various occasions through my life, and I was 50 at the point that I stood at Embercombe, I had been searching for. And in my 20s, in this valley, people would come, and there were little groups, and there would be, some children visiting occasionally. There would be people, there would be weeping, and there would be laughter. There would be music, and there would be conversation. There would be all the stuff that humans do and bring, but it would all really be about healing, about coming into deep connection. It would be about connection, not just with life and nature, but with ourselves, with each other. It would be everything about helping people to a place where they become so infused with the sense of the privilege of a life on earth that they then go out into the world and carry that torch with them. So that's what I felt, and I rang up the benefactor who'd offered this money in the first place, and I told him about it. He was constantly asking me how much it is, and I kept trying to put off telling him. And in the end, I did tell him, and then he said, I think I said to you, if you find a place that's a bit more expensive, let me know and I'll top it up. He said, but this is twice as expensive. So for goodness sake, he said, I'm sure it's wonderful, but, it's too much. So the phone call terminated, finished, and I got back in my car and started going off, and he called me back half an hour later, and he said, is it really that lovely? And I said, yes, it is. And he said, well, I think I have to come down and see it. And that was it.
Beautiful.
Mm. It was like, it's really interesting, the land in those days had none in it. It was one huge field of grass that was mowed cut for hay once a year, and then the sort of 20 acres of woodland and the lake. But it was it had none of the messiness in a way, or it's not just messiness, but we have put in the whole sort of field structure, even though that's on the verge of being dismantled now again. But about 5,000 trees planted, loads and loads of scrub and young woodland and all sorts of other things have gone in. So even though it felt amazing when I first arrived and saw all the nature, all the animals and the birds and everything, it is much more now than it was then. And that has been really special for me, because it's also had many more people visiting. So this whole idea that we could have people here and nature flourish, rather than this rather sad story of feeling that probably the whole place would be better off if we left.
When you talk of the valley that you were in your 20s, is this when you were with the Native Americans?
No, it was long before that. I was, I suppose I would have met the Native Americans about 10 years later. It was just a period of my life when I was experimenting and looking and wondering and contemplating about the life I might lead. It was also, of course, in the middle of the whole, well, not the middle, but when would it have been? It would have been very early 70s, so the whole hippie piece was still happening, although its innocence had already been broken in a way. Things were beginning to shift. But it was a time of dreaming. I mean, it's hard to, I don't know if it's hard. I imagine it might be hard to picture what it was like, but, hundreds of people all over the place were hitchhiking all the time. You were seeing them everywhere. There was no fear about it. Everybody was out there holding their thumb out, sort of thing, hitching lifts, individually, men, women, everybody. If you had long hair, as I did have then, I had some hair and it was long, you would always wave to each other. Any long hair that went past, you would acknowledge each other. And you would know that they were a sister or a brother, because you knew that hair meant something. You knew that it meant that they too were dreaming a similar dream. Many, many times, hitchhiking and just meeting somebody like that would stay at their place, because it was this wonderful period of hope and of a vision of a different way of living. And very exciting, intoxicating to be young and in that space. Of course, we all know that, it crumbled, because a dream and a vision is wonderful, but then comes the big test. It's the same test that Saturn brings in astrology, the test of can you then build the structures and the systems and everything else that will enable the dream to become rooted on Earth and take form and sustain. And it didn't have that. It was just the first wave, I'd say the first, but a wave of change and dreaming and transformation. And then the tide changed and it pulled out, and it wasn't there. But it was incredible. So the dream of the valley that I had at that time, I just felt, yes, this is entirely possible. And it's gathering a group of friends together, and we can do this. Looking back now, I would say that's true, but it misses something rather important. We all imagine that finding the money is the most difficult thing, and it is difficult sometimes. But actually, the most difficult thing is the complexity that people bring.
Mm-hmm.
That is the most difficult thing. Oh my goodness! that is exhausting and debilitating, and very, very, very challenging, and immensely rewarding and wonderful as well.
Yeah, I just had this memory of I just took my 4-year-old niece for a walk the other day, and we were walking past some people, and she just stopped and put her thumb out to the people that were walking past. And I said to her, and then she came running up to me and she went, I just put my thumb out to get those people to stop and talk to me. And I was like, how did you know how to do that? And she said, I don't know, I just thought of it. And I don't know if she's having me on and she's seen it somewhere. Yeah. But then she started, we were then going into the car park, and she started putting her thumb out to cars. Really? And I was like, and I had to have the talk with her where you can't do that because you can't you can't get in a car with someone that you don't know unless they know like one of your parents. And I was thinking, I'm like crushing this 4-year-old spirit of wanting to interact with strangers because we live in a slightly different society now where you can't do that, and it's sort of bad parenting or bad guardianship to even entertain like the play of that.
Absolutely. I mean, Amisha, it's a tragedy. This has happened. In fact, today I was in Australia earlier this year, New Zealand, Australia, and I spoke at a childhood summit, an organisation called Nature Play Queensland. And 15 years ago, apparently, Australia was top of the list of countries where children are free roaming, free unstructured play, gathering in crowds and gangs and little groups in neighbourhoods and with their bikes and all over the place, diving into the bush, on the edge of the village or town and just doing stuff. Nobody knew what. Probably some of it's dangerous and all the rest of it, but just being children. Australia is now close to the bottom of the list. And of course, it's happening in all countries. This level of fear has developed and crept in. And it is actually quite hard to tell whether it's founded or unfounded, as it were, because it is true that awful things can happen, but whether they happen any more than they did, I don't know. And certainly, actually, within the statistics of it, it's very seldom. So we are wondering whether or not there'll be interest locally for the showing of the film they made about the disappearance of our children from the outdoors, and playing in that free, unstructured way. So, yes, there's a loss of innocence in a way. It's a loss of innocence from that time that I was speaking about when I was in my early 20s. But also, I suppose, the dream and the story of how we might like to live again in the future. But there is such a wonderful thing about running around to Tommy's house and battering the door, and his mum coming to the door, and I'm saying, "Can Tommy come out to play?"
Yeah.
And she saying, "Yes, I'll just give him a call, Tommy." And then Tommy comes rushing out, and I as a little child said, "Tommy, would you like to come out to play?" And Tommy's already throwing his coat on, his mother shoving a sandwich in his hand, and nobody asks, "When are you back?
Or where are you going?"
Where are you going? We were just out the door. My mother used to wave us goodbye in the morning after our breakfast, and would not expect to see us until tea time, or whenever we got too hungry, cold or wet or whatever.
And I suppose we don't know yet what we're losing for the protection that we're giving.
Yes.
Because we don't know how that affects a child that becomes an adult when they aren't given space to roam free.
That's right. And George Monbiot didn't come up with the idea, but you know this theory of shifting base syndrome. So shifting base syndrome is, let's say when I was a child, and every year in the spring, we would know that from the frog spawn and toad spawn that was everywhere, there would be lots of little frogs. And we thought the little frogs were absolutely amazing and lovely, and we would always go off and we would gather some of these little frogs and we'd build a little home for them, and then we'd watch them hopping in little houses that they could live in and all these things. As children, we did all this, And it was really exciting, I had an understanding at that age of what nature looked like and what it consisted of. So there wasn't a pool of water that I visited where you didn't see newts and water boatmen and all these different kinds of little beings, minnows, sticklebacks, the little fish and everything. So I form an impression in my mind of what normal is. But so that sits with me. A child born 20, 30 years later experiences their level, and they assume that is normal. But actually, it's a massively degraded, let's say, from the one that I experienced. So we keep assessing what is normal, and we think what is normal is degrading, but we don't see it as such. Do you see what I mean? So because we see it as normal, we aim then if we see it change during our lifetimes, to return it to normal that feels healthy. But in fact, it's constantly, as it has been in our society for the last few hundred years, degrading and degrading and degrading, but we don't notice it. And I think it's a bit the same with children in the outdoors, you see, because it gets lost so easily of what it once was. So I would have said that my childhood experience of nature was thriving and flourishing. But actually, it was massively degraded from what it was 50 years previously, which was massively degraded from what it was 50 years before that, and so on and so forth. Because around the shores of Britain and in the land of Britain, going back far enough, the place was heaving with fish and food and all forms of wildlife. And it's the same, I feel, with our children. People will come to Embercombe, let's say with their children, and say how wonderful it is that they're able to be free here. But then we have a big fence around the place, around a big chunk of it, and what they call freedom, do you know what I mean, is still nothing like the freedom that we once had. So it's important, I think, because we one day, as it were, as we begin to recover in some form and redesign, rebuild, we need to sort of find, to go back to source of how things could be, not how they were just a few years ago.
And embracing with that the developments that we've had in technology and
yes,
in many systems that have increased quality of life.
Yes.
But then looking at where the disconnect is and
Yes.
how we can actually enjoy what we have more by
Yes.
being more connected to ourselves and to each other and to nature.
Yes.
And so it's not like one was better and one's worse, but how do we embrace them together
Yes.
for the future?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, I suppose at a certain level, I would say certain things were better in the past than they are now, but there are plenty of other things that were worse in the past and are better now. But it's interesting you mentioned that, because yesterday I was with a group from Vodafone, who are the team looking at this phrase, the Internet of Things. And myself and some others are working with them around what is the purpose that is guiding that business. Are they, is the purpose just to flog stuff, whatever people want, wherever that we can get them as thoroughly addicted as possible, and we'll just sell them that? Or are they willing to commit to a purpose that would state that it has to be to the benefit and enrichment of people's lives and not trivial? And would they connect with that? And to my mind, it was wonderful, because I didn't hear a single voice there that said, "Oh, to hell with all this, we'd rather just flog stuff and be paid for it." They were all nervous about the fact, because they know they have a very powerful tool in their hands, as it were, and they don't wish to deploy it irresponsibly. At the same time, they are beset by all kinds of sort of vested interests, which will try and influence what they do. But it was really encouraging to see, yes, this technology is in itself is neither good nor bad. It's just technology. It's the mind, as it were, that guides it. It's the heart that is within the people, who then decide how they begin to, what they bring to us and put on the shelves for us to consider buying. And that's a really complex one, because the cleverness of human beings is constantly leading us into places where beauty and ugliness sit side by side, and we have to make the choice as to which it is we wish to amplify and keep.
I love that notion that it's a choice.
That was the theme of the day we were saying to them. You have a choice to make today and every millisecond that follows forever afterwards. And that is what true leadership in a sense, is of the kind of leadership that we would like to have. And that is not leadership in the sense of somebody else telling us what to do, but of people of integrity deploying their skills and gifts. And one of the key attributes of a leader of this kind being not just a good listener, but a thoroughly interested listener, and a person willing to be guided themselves by what is emerging and what testing things, and when they do not produce the results that we would wish for, being willing to own that and then re-guide and navigate. I am endlessly surprised by how willing people are to do this, but also the massive, as I call it, vested interests, which also are always enticing us towards choices that do not serve us or others. It's quite challenging in that way, but I suspect it always has been.
How have you managed to take the knowledge and the wisdom that you have experienced through your own journey and the time that you've spent kind of deeply going into your inner world and spending time with the Native Americans, and then to find yourself going into the corporations? A lot of people that open up to this way of thinking, it almost makes it kind of impossible to engage in the more corporate reality that we have. How have you managed to embrace both and to keep that optimism and to see the humanness inside the corporations?
I don't know completely, but I would say I don't consider it to be. I feel that I have responded to what our Mother Earth has asked me to do. And I wish to be a good son of hers. It is my overriding desire to feel that I have listened and responded, irrespective of the fact that I found it thoroughly frightening. And there is a joy in that. There's a huge joy. Now, like everybody, I've had to battle, and I do constantly have to tussle with blaming somebody else or some other group and getting angry and upset with them. But I have learned repeatedly, of course, that usually what I blame in others is present in me as well. That that is not a helpful place to believe myself or oneself to be righteous, as it were, and others to be fools, And it's a nonsense anyway, and it's a form of ignorance and bigotry in a way. So I have done my best to work on the hypothesis that, and I think this is the case, most people, as it were, are good. Most people are kind. I mean, on the journey that I did, that I described in my last book, and walking from Malvern to the Isle of Anglesey in the winter of 2009, freezing cold, the endless generosity of people towards me, of all different kinds. As I've said in that talk, a nuclear submarine commander who I met walking his dog, the butcher in Dolgethley, the just endless kind of ordinary people living their lives who were so compassionate and caring and interested and fun and delightful and generous with me. So that is helpful. I have to say, another reason to answer your question is those Native Americans asked me to. And in fact, as I've often said, it wasn't so much a request, it was a command. They just said, everything that we're doing with you, makes no sense unless you are taking it out into the world. We would not waste our time doing this with you if we thought you were going to go and buy your acre of land, live on it, and garden your garden and stay within the confines of create a little paradise and live in it. They said that is not what is needed right now. What is needed is for people who have aligned with spirit and are feeling the heartbeat of our earth and all of that, to walk out into life, and not just the bits that they like, but all of it, and engage. It kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I just thought, yes, that's what I will do. And I will, in the end, I did choose to live in Devon and visit London rather than live in London and visit Devon. I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that. But I don't, as it were, when people come to Embercombe and start talking about Birmingham or Manchester or Leeds or wherever, Bristol, in such disdainful terms, I don't experience it like that. I love my trips to London, because it enriches me. I learn lots. I meet all kinds of different people. As we all know, London, immensely diverse, big city. Whereas, so my child, Kevo, who became my son when I married Wandia, is black, so he goes off to school near Newton Abbot. He's the only black child in the whole school, and there's nearly 1,000 pupils. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, I know that experience.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Indian.
So traveling and going out, and yesterday it was Vodafone, and when I arrived, I wasn't sure how what I was going to say would be received, but age definitely helps. Age and experience does assist, because if this had been 40 years ago, maybe I would have been more nervous. But there is something, having made a decision quite a long time ago and walked in that way, I don't care really. It's not that I don't care, I care a lot, but I'm not concerned about how they will receive it. I am concerned about how I will give it, because I need to give it well. I need to give it with heart. I need to give it generously. I do need to employ some skills so it's given fluently. I need to make it easy for them to accept, to listen, and to engage with me. And I need them not to feel threatened, and do not need them to feel judged. I just need to be able to open-heartedly share something with them, knowing that there is a part of them that will respond if they're able and willing to feel safe enough and put aside whatever defenses that they might normally employ. And it was fun, because I took my seat and we've got city airport aircraft going directly above the place where we are at the Good Hotel in London. The noise was, we've got a group who are kind of playful and quite noisy and all the rest of it. I know that I need them to quiet and really listen and come with me. So I've no idea how it's going to go, But pretty much from when I began right through to the end, they were completely there with me. And it was really lovely. And I enjoyed it a lot. And I think some good things will come of it. So in the end, it's a delight. I just wish I could get more engagement with the police, the military, politicians, I would love more engagement with all kinds, certainly more on the corporate side and business side, also more different diverse sections of our society, because I just feel, if we go back, when I was first told about these people called the peace chiefs from the Native Americans, the peace chiefs were very few peace chiefs. You could only become a peace chief if you'd been a warrior first, women or men, but you did that first and you learned all the disciplines of warriorship, apart from the skills of battle, if you like, of protecting the people. But every now and then there would be a warrior in a ceremony acknowledging them as in their achievement and attainment as a warrior, who would choose to lay down their weapons and announce themselves as a peace chief. And they would never ever pick a weapon up again, but they would live fully still as the warrior that they were. But their everything, in the way that they moved, acted, spoke, and everything, would be for peace. So we could say in a way that, Mahatma Gandhi in the way would be a sort of an example of that, the sort of warriorship of the person, and many others. In our own tradition here in Britain, it was said that the Druids could move, across battlefields and between different warring tribes and not be harmed, and many times were employed in resolving dispute and bringing peace, as it were, again. So we urgently need, as it were, these people who will be willing to walk out of their village, as it were, across the battle lines into these diverse places, and not simply with the view that they have something that the others need, but with curiosity and questions and interest in knowing and understanding more from these others and different folk, as it were, and simply being themselves. And I think it has a massive impact. It really does have massive impact. The quiet confidence of our old image of a leader being somebody in all these unhelpful things that we think of when we think of those people. But when we start thinking of somebody in that position always being happy to follow, because they have no ego involvement in needing to be the leader. They are only the leader because they have something to say which others find interesting, or they are only the leader because they care about something enough to start doing something about it and others engage. I mean, when you are telling me about your, what the work that you're doing, you start doing it and people are interested. And so people gravitate towards it. Leader may not be any kind of word that you would necessarily be, particularly interested in or attached to, but it is, in my view, that's what it is. Just like Polly Higgins starts working for the ecocide law because it is in her heart to do so, and she loves this earth. I don't think Polly ever measured her success on how many people she's got on as Facebook friends or LinkedIn, or you know what I mean, or whether how many people turn up to her talks. She'd be interested in that because she wants people to engage as earth protectors.
She wants 1 million.
That's right. She wants 1 million, or
at least.
Yeah, but nothing to do with because she measures herself in that way, just because she wants something good to happen. So anyway, I feel it's really important. I don't always find it easy or comfortable. I sometimes find it frightening, but I think it's really important. And it's really important that I do not forget who I am when I step into those places. And who I am is really very simple. It's who I am, who I need to be when I'm in those places is the same person I need to be. I am when I'm at home with my little boy, or with one dear here in the cabin with you, can't be that I'm one person when I'm speaking or running some workshop and not the same person when I'm ordering a meal in a restaurant, as it were.
And of course, and we all have different sides to our character.
Yeah.
And so we can't always be exactly the same.
No, no.
Like I know even doing this, that the interaction, the energy that, say, I have when I'm sitting talking to you is different to with every single guest. Like something new is created.
Yeah.
But the values, at least, of who we are and how we treat people.
Yes, and just to be clear, I suppose, I am many things, certainly not only as I am presented here to you. But I make no secret of the span of the person that I am. There have been periods in my life, as it were, where I'm, how can I put this? I mean, I feel like my arms remember holding weapons. And there is a part of me that thrills to that, you know. When I hear that, when I did that journey across Wales, I can almost hear the roar of our tribesmen as we engaged battle. You know, the weight of the sword in my hand, sort of thing. These things, I have to say, I love them in the same way that I love when was in ceremony with the Native Americans in the sun dance or something, and the feet are stamping on the ground and the drums are running and the chants are going to the sky, and you just feel the animal of you, you know, roaring inside as you run to the tree. I think some of the darker aspects of what it means to be human, because I have experienced and seen and witnessed and lived them in myself. My compassion has grown because I have become familiar with them in me. Do you know what I mean? The only difference is I'm older now, so my chemical makeup has subsided somewhat, so I'm a little more peaceful than I was. But the thing that for me is really important is coming into some kind of peaceful acceptance of who we are, and not that there is only one. I can only be this. That's the good bit. What is reassuring to many of the people coming from very, very different backgrounds, like the corporate business people, as it were, or any others, and in fact, actually to all people probably, is the feeling that they are not being, what's the word, beguiled, you know, that there is an authenticity, there's there isn't a pretense. I sometimes think that the ordinariness of who I am is some of the most powerful that I have to offer. You know, I am not dressed in white, and I have no great title. You know, I do not earn a lot of money, though people, I think, fantasize that I might. You know, and I have very real limits to my abilities and gifts and skills. It's kind of as we all are. So we bring ourselves forward. I will never be perfect, but I have long since given up the dream of that. But I would like to be more whole. I would like emotionally, spiritually, physically, and mentally to have more fully integrated.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in this notion I was sharing with you before we started recording, that this whole project kind of came from, I suppose I didn't really realize quite how big my question was at that point, because we're talking about nearly 10 years ago, and I was sort of in my mid-20s, and I was like thinking about this notion that what each one of us does with our time, money, and our energy is what is creating the world that we live in. And whatever language you want to put over that, what that means is that we are all leaders, and we are moving, well, we're living in this very interesting time in world history where there are so many ways to be heard. Just social media. You don't have to now know the person that is the commissioning editor at the newspaper to have your idea heard by somebody. There are so many ways to share of who we are, and then at the same time there's so much investment put in for us to kind of get lost, so we never quite find that essence of who we are. It's quite a privilege. We were talking a bit about that before we started to record as well, that to be able to have time and resources to go on these journeys. And from what I understand about your story, you found a way. And I think that when we have determination, we can all find a way. But what do you feel are the questions that we need to ask ourselves as we embrace this notion of ourselves as a leader, and we embrace this notion that what we do, the way we are, what we say, that it does all matter, even if it's not heard by anyone, even if it's only heard by a tree or our children, or you know.
I suppose you do have to somehow, you have to be interested in the first place, as it were, to with the question, how shall I live this life, you know? What matters to me? I think I'm quite a proud person in a way, you know. I would not be very happy if towards the end of my life I thought what a chaotic mess, you know, what a feeble life. Imagine the instruction to the person chiseling the saying on your gravestone, you know, a feeble life, inadequately lived, you know. Couldn't bear it. It's a little bit like what we were just speaking about, in a sense, probably some kind of rather misguided impulse about wanting to feel that I've achieved something, you know, if that makes sense, you know, has been helpful. So I think we need to care, I suppose. I have a feeling that I was given something. It's like you said, you know, we are dealt a hand of cards, and then we pick them up and we turn them over and we look at them, and they are not probably what we hoped.
I got this hand.
Oh God, I've got what? and we're tempted to then peer across to the other person and their deck of cards.
Swap the cards over.
Yeah, and we'd love to swap them because they look better, don't they? You know. And you think, what am I meant to do with this? We say to creation. And creation remains silent, you know. Because creation has said, creation knows fully well. It's nothing much to do with what those cards are. It's how you're now going to choose to play them. So one thing I know, there's been quite a bit of time that, and I suppose to some extent my work still is around helping people find, or facilitating a process, people finding their purpose in life. But for a while now, I've been telling the story of this woman in Sainsbury's in Exeter, where occasionally I'm there with my little boy. And there is one woman on the checkout who I started noticing. So that's her job. She I don't know what you call them, but she sits on the checkout in Sainsbury's. I imagine she's on a pretty low wage, And it's not a job that most people would aspire towards. It might be a sort of job that people do, but it would not be associated with a job pregnant with purpose, you know. And I watch her, and I see I notice how she interacts with me as we go through, and with Kai, my little boy. And it's like being bathed in loveliness. It is interested, it is curious, it's playful, it's engaging, it's warm, very warm. It's all together, it's the whole full effect of her humanity as she simply engages. So I think we could imagine, you know, when any of the prophets, we imagine returning to earth, I've started finding myself thinking they could do better, they might do worse than being a checkout person in the supermarket, because you have hundreds of people, as it were, filing past you every day, whom you have the opportunity to do something with and to be with. And so I look at her in a new way, and I thought to myself, in many ways, the question of what should I do is not as important as how can I just live these moments, every moment, in a way that just sings the joy of being alive on this earth at this time, and being generous with the person that I am, with whatever I'm interacting with at any time. So I feel that's really important. I've told this story quite a few times, but I had a interaction with a cab driver at a time when I thought that, and the hospital thought that I had a brain tumor, you know, so I couldn't drive. So I did lots of taxi drives, spent time in taxis. And in this one particular guy with this guy called Mohammed, I had this memorable occasion when he's saying to me all the time, you know, it's all right for you, you know, going around the world, having this fabulous time, just, you know, hobnobbing with various people and speaking. And I was late for this event, speaking at Wilderness Festival, and he seemed to be taking it very easy driving this car. And when he said this, it was the final straw sort of thing. And so I suddenly found myself saying to him, look here, Mohammed, you know, every day you give lifts to somewhere between 1 and 30 people, and you have them in your cab for somewhere between 10 minutes and an hour, let's say. You have limitless opportunities if only you were curious enough, as it were, to see these as sort of mentoring, coaching sessions that you be running with these people, being inquisitive about their lives, asking the questions. You know, these are sessions that you could be holding that could be so filled with fascination and interest and everything, and you know, that would enrich people's lives. They would tumble out of the cab at the other end laughing, or deeply introspective as they consider some of what you've asked them, or you will be the beneficiary of so many stories. I said, everything is possible in this little cab, and they can't even escape because, you know, the door's closed and you're driving. So we had a lot of fun with this. So that's that bit. And then does come the question. I have certain gifts. In those cards that I looked at and was rather disappointed with, there will likely be some cards that give me some inroads into something that have influence. Even my harsh experiences, even those things that have been painful to go through, of course, bring all kinds of learning and all kinds of insights if I have the mind, the willingness to see them rather than only feeling sorry for myself, as it were. And as we begin to look at the world in this way, begin to realize that we are loaded with experience, with opportunity, with potential. And so I frequently talk about 3 questions, which I think are important for people. You know, What is it that you most deeply and profoundly love? Because I think though there are similarities, people have particular things that they really move to. What do you care about? Ultimately, it becomes actually what is sacred to you, and that you would never willingly or deliberately betray, because you know that to do that would be one of the worst things you could ever do. So to know but why are we never? Is this question never addressed? With our tiny children, our primary school children, our secondary school children, our university children. It's never mentioned in our secondary schools or our universities or our business schools. But I can hardly think of anything more important than to say something to people, go on a journey. Hold that question in front of you. What is sacred to you? What would you stand for? Stand by and protect. I mean, one could say that Polly, had asked that question. She just knew that she deeply cared and had the means to do something about it. So the second one is, what are your deepest and most profound gifts? So it does presuppose that we have gifts. But I think that's a great hypothesis to work on. It was the assumption of the indigenous people that taught me that every time one of us is born, creation lodges a tiny piece of her genius inside our gut and says, now you're going to have to find it. You're going to have to grow it.
It gives me goosebumps.
And then you must share it. Yeah. And so whether we choose to believe I have a gift or not, let's just say that's a good working assumption. I have a gift, and I'll go on this journey, and I will never give up until I have located, grown, and I'm then fully sharing it. Why is that important? It's important for itself, but you see, ultimately our work should orientate itself around our gifts. And experience and various other qualities and education and everything are really helpful, but they are not the core of it. So it's the gift. So when our work becomes centered around our gifts, we shine and all sorts of wonderful, and we cannot help but be successful. We are likely to get some of the things that we would like in our life. And most of us would like to be seen and acknowledged in some way, because most of us carry around, at least at the beginning of this journey, a rather low opinion of ourselves. And many go through an entire life with a very low opinion of themselves. And that, to those Native Americans, taught me is like slapping the goddess in the face. When they asked me once, they said, Mac, we believe you've got some land that you've got in Britain where you do ceremony. At that time, I started apologizing for it almost immediately. I said, well, I don't, and I just rent it, and it's just this bit of land, and it's nothing like as beautiful as this piece of land where I was in States, and it's only an acre, and it's got a barbed wire fence around it. It's not nothing particularly beautiful, and the sense in the room began to change, the atmosphere, and it became pregnant with anger and outrage in a way. And until one of them finally just exploded at me and saying, how dare you disrespect Mother Earth like you are. She chose to give you. She said, personally, I never would have done. She chose to give you this, a little piece of her beauty, as it were, for you to do something with, and all you can do is apologize and moan about it not being very special and all the rest of it. And they wouldn't speak to me for a week. Wow. I was commanded that I was going to, and they really put me through something. I was crying, weeping most of that week. But they said that to their mind, that was one of the worst things that you could ever do. He said, to see you stand proudly there and describe this little jewel that you had been given, and for us to feel confident that you were going to truly care for her and do something beautiful there. It would have been so impressive. But no, you didn't do that, did you? So gifts. And gifts are not revealed always that easily. So I did not find my gifts and fully acknowledge them until I was a 50 plus. That's me. I'm a slow learner. There are many people who find them much sooner than me, but that was my case. So there you go, It doesn't matter when. It only matters at having done so that you engage and employ in. And the third one, what are your deepest and most profound responsibilities? And that can be sobering, and as you begin to consider them. But actually, it's really just about helping us become adult and grow up and realize that there are things to be done. But ultimately, it is not a burdensome. It is the joyfulness of being alive, knowing we have some time, but not knowing how much, making the decision that during that time we will live as courageously and gracefully as we can, and generously, and we'll no doubt love that life and do something useful at the same time.
And often what I find is that the gifts and the responsibilities are very linked, and the responsibilities almost provide the structure in which to share our gifts.
I like you using that word, Amisha, actually, because I think its structure is a word that I would associate somehow closely with responsibility. Yes, I think they do. They help us make a framework around which we then place our intelligence and our effort and our activity.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you, so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty. I'm struck by your story about the apologizing for what you have. And I suppose I feel sometimes that I'm incredibly ungrateful for what I have, despite, doing my gratitude practices and being a meditator, and part of it is because my gifts have caused me a lot of pain in this life so far. I found them quite early and bullied, outcast, all kinds of things because they stick out in a certain way or they trigger jealousy in a certain way or something. And so I've gone to crazy lengths to make myself small to in the hope that wouldn't happen. It still happens, and then I've just made myself small, so everyone's lost. And I find that it's part of the pain of living in a culture that doesn't nurture the right things from early on,
Yes.
and that doesn't work in a cohesive community where everyone kind of has their role that they were kind of born into, and it's about realizing that, which is what we see in a lot of native cultures.
Yeah.
That it's like, oh great, yes, you have this missing part to what we need. But instead we live in a culture that likes to homogenize in certain ways, that chooses who and what is championed, often based on sort of things such as background, privilege, class, skin color, like all kinds of things. And what's not scary or what's not intimidating to the status quo. And I feel like that I know that there are others that carry the scars of that. And it's helpful to voice it, I think, sometimes, because it helps to open up more courage.
Yes, and feel more deeply. Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, I have found it extremely painful, I mean, I just feel every group, as it were, that I have found myself a part of has always wanted me to be a certain way. And I've probably been happily complicit in that to begin with, because it's a home and I feel comfortable. It's nice to know your family, know your tribe. But then there always comes this moment when suddenly you begin to feel the confines of it, or I've done, and realize that certain views or opinions or beliefs expressed in that are likely to be knocked back as you're sort of come back inside the system. So, and I have to say that's been within the more obvious ones of conforming to our society as it is, expectations around career and income and all those sort of things. But I have also found it to be true within, as it were, our alternative subculture spaces as well, and sometimes worse, because here at Embercombe I have found it very difficult. All our various enterprises which we're setting up, and organizations and movements which we're trying to make this world better, we have almost like the brighter that they beam, the darker sometimes the kind of underbelly, because we have not come from those cultures that you described, as it were. We've been born into and emerged in the way that we have, with all this very unhelpful education and everything. It has been very tough. And also, I mean, if I just use Embercombe as an example, in fact, we used to have arguments within Embercombe about whether we should engage with people from the business world, And I find all these terms like the suits are coming, I find them repellent, because they are attempting to then pull us together in that same old way that war helps us pull together, because we have identified an enemy, and then suddenly we can all hate the same person or same group and feel good.
It's the othering and the dehumanizing.
Yes. And the very fact that Embercombe and any other project, has to make, given that it works, for as long as it works inside this economy, there are bills to be paid and money needs to be earned. So then the battle between, how are we going to earn that money, and what is truly, as it were, betraying the cause or the values of the place, and how can you do that? Would it be better for Embercombe to go bust? Or should it continue? And if it continues, how I'm not explaining it very well, but how do we sail this ship so that it stays afloat and does something? Yeah, I have found it really, really taxing, and in many ways, like on some of the, I read a while ago, following some of the posts on Facebook where something has come up, and you watch all these posts that come underneath it,
all of the comments,
and I'm just like, my jaw's on the floor.
Yeah.
As I read it, and I think, I don't want to do this. I don't wish to. It's almost quite horrifying how willing people are to put such negativity and hostility out. There is never any question about giving the benefit of the doubt. Seems so polarizing and so often from groups which I am personally quite associated with.
Yeah.
That, where is the kindness? Where is the openness? Where is because there are things that need to be challenged. There are things that need to be sort of illuminated and whatever. But the manner in which it's done feels very important. The intention that is underneath it, not simply screaming how virtuous we are, denouncing the other.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly complex, as you said in the beginning. Humans.
Yes, yes.
And human relationships, and what, I guess also like what's being enacted through us in communities, as well as what we're personally bringing.
Yeah.
And how to create space that is truly of the values that we're talking about. I haven't seen it done anywhere in the world. I mean, apart from perhaps in communities where they're still living very closely connected to the land, and it's a community that you're born into. And I haven't spent a lot of time in those places. You can tell me more. But what I see in the Western world as we try and create these intentional communities is a lot of big messes. And in some cases, it can be quite traumatic for people involved. I was curating a gathering for an intentional community last year, and it was decided that this was going to be the year of the male and female curator working together in perfect harmony as we unite all of the masculine and the feminine against the backdrop of Me Too and the collective rising of the dismantling of the patriarchy on land that has come through landowning colonialism history.
Exactly.
And I found myself here as the female curator of, one of the lowest sort of income people in the community, one of the only non-white skinned people, and then being given the mantle of like the equal feminine, and then in voicing wherever it wasn't really there, suddenly it kind of got put on me that it was all to do with my own personal trauma, and I was like, my personal trauma isn't this heavy. It's like there's something bigger happening here. And despite having a whole host of shaman in everyone's phone books and everyone having studied therapy and studied all kinds of different nonviolent communication or family constellations, there was no cohesive way to handle the heaviness that was sort of almost being invited in by suggesting that in this community we could balance like the microcosm of everything. And I've not spoken to anyone from that community since we had that gathering, one or two of the women very briefly. And I just don't think we know
Well, I'm absolutely with you on that.
And so I don't share
either.
that to shame this community or to, I know that experience was not, I mean, of course, part of it was me, but I couldn't get out of bed for a month after it. I was so tired. And interestingly, there were a few different wisdom keepers from different traditions there and a few female ones. And actually, some of them just reached out to me afterwards and just a little note of like, I saw what you were doing. It might never be seen by the community that you're part of here, but I did see, and I'm sending you love. And just getting those little notes was enough for me to know, okay, I haven't like lost my mind. But like we're carrying all these stories, and we don't know what we're carrying, and when we bring people together, we don't know what we're bringing out. So this notion that we can kind of come together and be in the valley and create this better world, it requires so much humility and so much being able to just step back and separate the personal and keep opening our arms with compassion. And in a way, I thought that we had done this. And then I found out by some other people that went to the next meeting that wasn't what, that then there was a kind of, oh no, that was Amisha's story. Not like Amisha was bringing up some stuff that's there. And then other women were like, well, it's not your story because we all felt it too. And how can we just keep being open to the fact that it's not personal? We don't know everything. It's complicated. And keep opening.
Well, you've described my experience as well. It's very, very complex, and we are a long way from it. I don't think it means, of course, we shouldn't keep. In fact, it absolutely necessitates that we do keep, but it's not going to be just whipped together by a group of well-meaning folk just all gathering together and saying, we can do this. I mean, because then there's the journey. So that's why quite a lot I use this notion of we have to commit to the journey. It's not so much as it has to be this, but just the journey. Committing to the journey means that you don't give up, and that you keep walking, and that you go through weather. And you will go through weather. Every time it gets sunny for longer than a week or so, deep down, I'm kind of just assuming that it'll always be sunny. And it's so shocking when suddenly it's not.
Like this morning.
The rain. Suddenly, oh my God, what's this sort of thing, And if it's raining or cloudy and cold, the fantasy is it'll always be like this sort of thing. And how extraordinary it is when the clouds break. It's just weather. And I think our lives, we walk through weather. And we are wise if we put this fantasy aside. We just say, it's weather. I'm walking through weather. And in every step along the way, there are things to be gained and things to be learned. And I am slowly putting together this human being. But I find, for instance, within many of the more spiritual groups, there is a kind of a complete denial, dismissal, and scapegoating thinking, and clear, good, strong thought. And feeling and heart is risen to such a level that it's almost toxic, that thinking is considered to be toxic. Equally, I go into other groups where it's the other way around. There are groups where everything physical is considered to be lower and base, as it were, and everything which is spiritual sort of thing is considered to be where it's at. And I find the whole thing nonsense. It's like we were given these four great powers, which in the Native Americans are the four powers of the human self, are our spirit and our emotions, our bodies, as in physical things, and our minds. They need to be brought into this place, as it were, instructed and led from the center. But these minds we have are this brilliance, this extraordinary capacity for working in abstract ways to conceive theories and ideas and things, is an immense gift from creation. But it needs to be held within, as it were, a deeper wisdom. This spirit is not this ridiculous charade of spirit where it becomes a kind of snobbery and a sort of weird kind of thing, which in many religions has also ended up becoming in having a very uncomfortable relationship with sexuality and things of that kind, or whether it's in every direction. It's this whole coming together. So I find those experiences that I have when I experience these things all in coming together briefly in some kind of wonderful, full-rounded way is so wonderful. That's what I am. And though it will always be work in progress, that's what I'm trying to do with myself.
Absolutely. And I suppose sometimes we veer one way, and then we have to veer a bit further the other way.
That's right.
And then,
Yep.
And we accept that perhaps we will die having never found the perfect place of balance.
I think that is inevitable. Yes. It's like a ship sailing on the sea, and you arrange your sails and everything according to the wind and the currents as it is at that time, but the wind shifts. So you're always having to reorientate and rearrange. If you apply yourself, you become more intelligent and more skillful in doing that.
And so with the journey, how do we honour the twin trail?
Well, the first piece, of course, is to recognise that the twin trail, the inner path of our own self-becoming, healing, growing, developing, the outer path of having effect in the world. The first is I think, acceptance that we cannot say, I will go and sort myself out internally and then fully realized I will bring myself to the world, the outside world. I don't think we can do that, because I have been told in my lifetime, I have met some people who I've been told are fully realized beings. And I'm respectfully happy to meet them in that way. But to date, so far, every one of those people that I have then spent time with and lived with, as it were, and really seen, has not appeared to be quite as fully realized as they might perhaps have been suggested. So I tend to think, well, such people may exist, but I suspect they're rather rare. And more practice. So it seems worth saying that phrase, I will always be work in progress, and so will 99.9% of the people that I will ever meet and engage with. So I can't wait. So I have to say, no, I'm going to take on this far more challenging task of stepping, hopefully mindfully, into life and engaging fully. So yes, in much younger years, I totally avoided the political because I found it rather boring and predictable. I just felt like I don't want to do all that stuff. I've seen what they look like, and I don't want to belong to that tribe. I'm no longer in that position. because the political is massively important, One of our people that came to Embercombe, a really lovely person, but they posted this thing where they said, I won't be voting, It only encourages them, and people laughed, as it were. But underneath the laughter, I just felt a terror, because I thought, yes, but others will. If we let go of that, we may well find that we have suddenly got in power people with the full weight of the law and all the rest of it. In some ways, these laws that we have, imperfect as they are, and the privileges that we enjoy, the freedoms that we enjoy, wholly insufficient in many ways as they are. People laid down their lives for these things. People went through agonies to achieve some of these things. And so it does not feel responsible to me to sort of abdicate out of that. So I am interested now, and I am engaged in that way. It's the same story, isn't it, Amisha? It's like all of it together. The twin trail, I feel, the more we dig into it, we really begin to see what it means to walk and live in this world as a fully engaged person, saying, I have needs, things that will enable me to really enjoy this life, that have to do maybe with relationships, with intimate relationships, with family, children, whatever, these things. They don't have to be these things, but let's say that we are made differently. I am far better living if I have the chance to live close with nature, but I do not wish to be somebody that hides in nature. And nature is in our cities and in every human being as much as it is in the wilds of Antarctica, as it were. The twin trail just says, walk fully and experience it all. And firstly, in terms of leadership, be your own self-leader. One of the wonderful things those people that taught me said was kneel only to the rose. You kneel to nobody and nothing other than the rose. The rose for them was our Mother Earth, was creation. Kneel to creation in gratitude, just sort of in awe of this wonderful privilege of this human life, and in service to beauty, really. But to everything else, do not kneel. That doesn't mean do not be in respectful association with, but don't put yourself in servitude to any other or idea or anything. And I think that's right, because we are trained conformists, we are trained slaves, and that is not a place where we can do something. We're weighted down with all these, so we have to meet them, engage with them. Yeah,
it's a very powerful. Yeah, very immediately, as I sense in that, I can see how many times I've betrayed that.
Yes, yes.
And how it didn't feel good.
No, that's right. Well, me, absolutely. And so that's the other thing is, I feel people as they grow older, people my age, there is somehow, I think it's mostly unconscious, but feeling that we've done our work and we don't have...
What is your age?
I'm 70. We do not have just in end of April. We do not, it's like I've arrived somewhere. It's nonsense, In fact, that's an invitation to start dying. The more experience, the more successful, the more that we live with the fruits of whatever we've done before.
And the more resources.
The more likely, actually, it would appear that we become fearful, no longer willing to experiment, no longer willing, we want people just to relate to us on the basis, as many older people do, that we expect to be respected simply because we have arrived, we've done the years, but that for me is not hardly good enough. If anything, as we grow older, we should be attempting to embody the 6-year-old more and more and more in our playfulness, in our inquisitiveness, in our curiosity as to what life really is. Because we are far more trustworthy in that place. All those sort of things around rigidity, expecting somehow life to give us whatever it should give us. I wish I could remember the word, but I can't at the moment.
I feel like I can just
about
it's
just almost there. Is not helpful. I had a word, when I gave one talk in London recently, one of the young people involved in the sort of youth part of Extinction Rebellion said, would I be willing to come and speak and engage with them? And I very enthusiastically said, yes, I'd love to. If that happens, it won't be just because I feel that I can do something for them. It will be because I know that it's good for me to be exposed to these things and to remain in touch, that I can stay relevant. So I feel we should, if ultimately the greatest challenge leadership of any kind has to deal with is hubris. So and that more likely comes with the acquisition of the rewards of a life being lived. Well, so that for me is sort of really big. So the Twin Trail says forever. It is not, you do not do the work and then you relax, because you will eventually become deluded and then probably toxic ultimately.
And it's kind of the same as what you were saying to the cab driver. It doesn't really matter like what our actual job is. It doesn't matter like where we live or who or what we have access to. It doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter how spiritual we are.
Yes.
But it's like, how can you live in a way where you're showing up in a way that makes it beautiful to be alive?
Yes, that's right.
And it sounds so simple. And yet
it's so unbelievably, yes.
And yet it's so easy to be grumpy or to be to be any of those things.
So that's the other thing, isn't it? Because I think that's another great gift or quality is being sufficiently thick-skulled, as it were, to just keep picking yourself up again. I don't think persistence is given enough. It's an amazing quality. To screw up, make a fool of yourself, humiliate yourself, act in a thoroughly unhelpful manner, and then pick yourself up again, dust yourself off, saying, not just ignore it, but take whatever, and then keep going.
Yeah.
It's really important.
The one that I'm really interested in at the moment is how can we break our hearts more and more open? And so when we get hurt, when we see things that hurt us, as we're here in a time where, we're seeing destruction of nature, all these kinds of things, but how can we use each heartbreak to be stronger and more big-hearted?
Yes, and more joyful almost. Well, that, for me, Amisha, that is, part of I'm sure part of the whole experience of this life on earth is to risk loving. And it is a risk, because if you love, what I understand of a Buddhist perspective might say this isn't true, but it seems to me that if I love really profoundly, I will have to accept the fact that I'm going to experience, real pain as well. Because at some point it will be withdrawn. The
weather will change.
The weather will change. I will have to say goodbye. I've loved this life. I am so totally aware that I will never get through any fraction of all the things I would love to do and experience. And I have so many ideas about how I might relive this life if I was given the chance, sort of thing. I will have to say goodbye to all these things that I ferociously love. And I will have to say goodbye to them. To my wife, to my child, these exquisite human beings whom I share all the messy mass of our day-to-day lives. I will have to say goodbye. Every time a relationship breaks, which we thought was going to be the most extraordinary and lifelong, we have to say goodbye. When our friends pass or leave us or slam the door in an angry outburst, and we have to say goodbye, And then we've had the bigger macro picture of what's happening to the earth and life and this, and for no good reason. So there's anguish. So I often speak, I think a sign of somebody that is somehow connected and in touch is that they have one hand cupped that is just overflowing with the grief and the suffering of what is rolling around our world, the agony of that, human and other than human. And the other one, which is the unbounded joy of having a few years here to be alive and experience life. If we wish to continue being of any use to anybody at all, we can't afford to let either of those drop. We have to learn how to walk with them both, feel it all, and still continue that journey. But we are always persuaded or tempted or encouraged by our own voices inside us to somehow ignore one or dismiss one. That leads us astray, really.
Mm. I feel like we could talk all day. I would love to. Curious to ask what it's like to have a 2-year-old at 70.
At 70. Yeah. Well, it's really funny. I am constantly in situations where people assume I'm his grandfather. For the large part, I'm fine with it. I do have moments of trepidation when I think of me being 80 and him being 12. And even worse, him being, as it were, 15 and me being 80-something, Because I won't be able to be there for him in a way that I would choose to be. And it doesn't matter how many people say to me all this stuff about, the new 80. What's that expression? Well, in other words, you can be.
We are able to be a lot younger than we.
Yes.
Than we appear.
And that's kind of true. But the fact is that in the last 10 years since I was 60, I have experienced and am experiencing what it's like when the body starts wearing out. Not just the body, but the mind ultimately starts wearing out. So the brain, rather. So looking at that, I know that he is a very vigorous, powerfully built, vitally alive little boy. I have no doubt he is going to sort of just erupt into life. And I remember the day when I was fighting with my father, play fighting, and I'd reached a certain level in my development. And as he ran at me, I ducked down and I lifted him up above my head and I threw him on the beach. And that sudden realization I was stronger than he was. As a boy to his father sort of thing, this was a shocking thing. And it was on one hand, it was triumphant. On the other hand, it was just despairing because I did not wish that to be the case. So, yeah. So what is it like? It's everything. how am I experiencing it right now? I am loving it. I have such good fun with him. We play. He wakes up, says, "Wake up, Dada," and I have to wake up. He will insist I wake up. We play, and I take him into as many experiences as I can. We're on the seaside all last weekend, playing in the water, helping him feel comfortable and safe in the water. Just as he looks at me, and I realize, and of course I love him, he's my little boy, but I also realize I really like this little person. He is such fun. And so it's amazing. And I am overwhelmed, and long may it be so. I should also just mention my 21-year-old son, who is not my biological son, but he is my son. And so there's this boy who has just, a young man, who was a boy when I first met him, who has just from nowhere ended up, in terms of educational achievement and a background that he came from, is at Leeds University doing computer science and looking like he's going to get a first-class honours degree, And I look at him and I just am reveling in the fact that he is, on that journey. So the question then will become, what will he do with all this? But that will be his choice. But my job is to stand next to him and be with him as his dad, but not stand in the way, and let him make those choices. And I'm sure he will do great things. So I'm in an amazing situation in a way with these two kids, and my stepson, by the way, who also has now become is a special forces soldier. So it's just it's bewildering, it's amazing. So I'm lucky, and very happy with my lot.
Can you leave us with a brief version of the children's fire?
Yeah. So the circle of chiefs sat round a long time ago and asked themselves the question, how shall we as a community of leaders remain worthy of the seat that we hold in this council? Understanding as we do that many leaders, as they become used to being leaders and receive all the privileges and rewards of being a leader, unconsciously begin to drift towards making choices, creating laws, making decisions which serve the best interests of the community of leaders rather than the people that they serve. They sat round with this question, and they came up with the idea of a little fire that they would build within the centre of the circle of the Council of Chiefs, women and men, to which every chief had to pledge, make a vow, no decision, no action, nothing of any kind will go out from this community of leaders, from this circle of chiefs, that will in any way hurt or compromise the future of our children forever. And when they said that, not just human children, but the children of all kind, no law, no decision, nothing of any kind will be permitted to go out from this circle of chiefs that will harm the children. And life immediately became much more complicated. But the laws were tested, as it were. The decisions were tested against this criteria. And I cannot imagine that they were, I can only imagine they were greatly enriched by every law, every decision having to pass that test. And we would be well served, perhaps, to employ the same thing now in our universities, in our government, in our businesses, in our NGOs, in our community groups, and in every other single little operation that we have running
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Amisha. I've really enjoyed it. It's been lovely to have this time with you.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?